The Asylum Secrets, October 13, 1995. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the town of Willow Creek, Maine. The autumn chill was setting in, and the trees were ablaze with fiery reds and oranges. But for a group of 5 friends, the beauty of the season was overshadowed by the thrill of the adventure they were about to embark on. The abandoned asylum at the edge of town had always been a source of local legends. Some said it was haunted, others believed it was cursed. But for Sarah, Mark, Emily, Jake, and Leo, it was a challenge they couldn't resist. They had grown up hearing tales of the mysterious disappearances and chilling events that took place within its walls, and now, armed with flashlights and a sense of invincibility, they were determined to uncover its secrets. As they approached the imposing structure, the weight of its history pressed down on them. The once grand building was now a decaying relic, its windows shattered and its walls covered in overgrown vines and graffiti. The large iron gates were rusted shut, but a broken window on the side provided an easy entry point. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the distant drip of water and the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. The group's flashlights pierced the darkness, revealing long-abandoned patient rooms, rusted medical equipment, and peeling wallpaper. Sarah, always the most curious of the group, began rummaging through an old desk in what appeared to be a nurse's station. Her fingers brushed against a leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age. The name Clara was inscribed on the inside cover. Flipping through it, Sarah found entries detailing the daily life of a nurse working in the asylum. But as she read on, the tone of the entries shifted from mundane to deeply unsettling. "Guys, listen to this," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. She began to read aloud an entry dated June 5, 1972. "The patients are becoming increasingly agitated. They speak of shadows in the corners of their rooms and whispers in the night. Dr. Mitchell insists it's just their conditions worsening, but I've started hearing them too." The group exchanged uneasy glances. Jake, trying to lighten the mood, joked, "Maybe we should have brought a Ouija board." But his attempted humor fell flat. The atmosphere in the asylum was growing more oppressive by the minute. Determined to explore further, the group ventured deeper into the building. They discovered an old electroshock therapy room, its chair still intact and electrodes hanging from the ceiling. In another room, they found walls covered in scribbles, the desperate writings of patients long gone. As night began to fall, the friends decided to set up camp in one of the larger rooms. They lit candles, casting eerie shadows on the walls, and huddled together for warmth and comfort. Outside, the wind howled and the trees rustled, but inside, the only sound was the soft flicker of the candle flames and the occasional rustle of Clara's diary pages as Sarah continued to read. Unbeknownst to them, the true horror of the asylum was yet to be revealed. The dim glow of the candles illuminated the room, casting dancing shadows that seemed to play tricks on the eyes. The friends, huddled together, listened intently as Sarah continued reading from Clara's diary. Each entry grew darker, hinting at a malevolent force that had taken hold of the asylum. July 17, 1972. Sarah read, her voice quivering. "The patients are no longer responding to treatments. They stand motionless for hours, staring at the walls, whispering to themselves about the silence. I've tried to understand, but it's like a weight pressing down on my mind." As the night deepened, the atmosphere in the room grew tense. The friends exchanged nervous glances, the weight of Clara's words settling heavily upon them. Emily, trying to break the tension, suggested they explore more of the asylum. "We might find more clues about what happened here," she said. Splitting into 2 groups, they ventured further into the building's depths. Mark, Jake, and Emily headed towards the west wing, while Sarah and Leo explored the east. In the west wing, Mark's flashlight beam landed on a door at the end of a long corridor. The word "silence" was scratched into its surface. Curiosity piqued. They approached, but the door was locked. Using a crowbar they'd brought along, they managed to pry it open. Inside, they found a pitch-black room. The walls were covered in frantic scribbles and drawings of eyes that seemed to follow their every move. In the center of the room stood a pedestal with an old tape recorder. Meanwhile, in the east wing, Sarah and Leo stumbled upon a room filled with shelves of old tape recorders. Each was labeled with a patient's name. Curiously, they played one. The tape crackled to life, revealing a conversation between a doctor and a patient. The patient's voice was filled with terror as he spoke of the silence, describing it as an overwhelming force that consumed everything. The tape ended with a chilling scream. The two groups reconvened, sharing their discoveries. The weight of the asylum's dark history pressed down on them, and they began to feel an overwhelming sense of dread. The echoing footsteps they had dismissed earlier returned, growing louder and more persistent. Whispers filled the air, growing in intensity, making it hard to distinguish reality from imagination. Suddenly, Mark's face went pale. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. The others strained their ears, and to their horror, they realized that the echoing footsteps and whispers were their own, distorted, and played back to them in a nightmarish loop. As the realization dawned, the group felt a shift in the atmosphere. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the once familiar corridors twisted and turned, leading them in circles. The asylum, it seemed, was alive, and it was toying with them. Desperate to find a way out, they retraced their steps, but every door they opened led to another identical corridor. The whispers grew louder, and the echoing footsteps seemed to come from all directions. In a moment of clarity, Sarah remembered Clara's diary. "We need to find out what happened here," she said, her voice filled with determination. "It's the only way to break free." But as they delved deeper into the asylum's secrets, they would soon discover that some things are better left buried. The once adventurous group now found themselves trapped in a maze of their own making. The asylum's walls seemed to breathe, pulsating with a malevolent energy that threatened to consume them. The echoing footsteps and whispers grew louder, creating a cacophony of sounds that made it impossible to think clearly. Sarah clutched Clara's diary tightly, convinced that the answers lay within its pages. She continued to read, her voice barely audible over the din. The entries grew more frantic, detailing the asylum's descent into madness. Experimental treatments using sound frequencies to alter brainwaves had been conducted, aiming to cure the most severe cases of mental illness. But something had gone horribly wrong. August 23, 1972, Sarah read. "The experiment, it's taken on a life of its own. The silence isn't just a lack of sound, it's a force, a void that draws everything into it. We can't control it. Patients, staff, they're all succumbing." Mark, his face contorted with fear, suddenly began to laugh hysterically. "I can hear it," he whispered, his eyes wide with terror. "The silence, it's calling to me." Without warning, he sprinted down a corridor, disappearing into the darkness. The group, now down to 4, chased after him, their flashlights cutting through the inky blackness. They found Mark in the pitch-black room they had discovered earlier, standing motionless, staring at the wall. His face was blank, his eyes empty. Desperate to snap him out of his trance, Emily played one of the tapes they had found. The familiar voice of the doctor filled the room, speaking of the experiment's unintended consequences. The silence, he explained, was a byproduct of the sound frequencies, creating a void that trapped its victims in a never-ending loop of their own thoughts and fears. Realizing the gravity of their situation, the group devised a plan. They would use the tape recorders to create a counter-frequency, hoping to neutralize the silence and break the loop. Working together, they gathered all the equipment they could find, setting up a makeshift lab in the therapy room. Hours seemed to pass in minutes as they worked feverishly, their focus singular. Finally, with a tape ready, they pressed play. A piercing sound filled the room, causing them to cover their ears. The walls of the asylum seemed to shake, and the echoing footsteps and whispers grew louder, more insistent. But as the tape played on, the sounds began to fade. The oppressive weight that had hung over them lifted, and the corridors of the asylum returned to their original state. The silence, it seemed, had been defeated. Exhausted but relieved, the group made their way to the exit, eager to leave the horrors of the asylum behind. But as they stepped outside, they were met with an eerie sight. The world outside was silent, devoid of any sound. Birds flew overhead, their wings beating noiselessly. Trees rustled in the wind, but no sound reached their ears. The silence, it seemed, had escaped the confines of the asylum, and now it threatened to consume the world. The world outside the asylum was eerily muted, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. The group stood paralyzed, taking in the surreal landscape. The once familiar sounds of nature were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to blanket everything. Sarah, clutching Clara's diary, whispered, "We need to reverse this." The group nodded in agreement, realizing that the counter-frequency they had created had inadvertently amplified the silence. allowing it to seep into the world. They quickly returned to their makeshift lab inside the asylum. Time was of the essence. Using the equipment they had gathered, they began working on a new frequency, one that would restore balance and bring back the sounds of the world. As they worked, the weight of the silence pressed down on them. Every movement, every breath, seemed amplified in the absence of sound. But the group was determined, drawing strength from each other. Hours passed, and finally, with a new tape ready, they pressed play. A soft, harmonious frequency filled the room, resonating with a gentle warmth. The group held their breath, waiting. Slowly, sounds began to filter in. The distant chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, the soft murmur of the wind. The world was coming back to life. Elated, the group made their way outside. The sun was rising, casting a golden hue over the landscape. The sounds of nature filled the air, a symphony of life that brought tears to their eyes. But their relief was short-lived. From the distance, they heard a faint whisper, growing louder and more insistent. The echoing footsteps were back, accompanied by the chilling whispers that had haunted them inside the asylum. Realizing that the silence was still a threat, the group decided to burn Clara's diary, hoping to sever the link to the asylum's dark past. They watched as the flames consumed the pages, the diary's secrets turning to ash. As the last page burned, the whispers and footsteps faded, replaced by a profound stillness. The group, exhausted but triumphant, made their way back to their car, eager to put the horrors of the night behind them. As they drove away, the sun casting long shadows over the town of Willow Creek, they couldn't shake the feeling that they had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. The asylum, with its dark history and malevolent force, would forever be a reminder of the thin line between reality and madness. The story ends with a news report about the mysterious events at the abandoned asylum. The reporter speaks of the group's brave efforts to combat the silence and the lingering effects of the asylum's experiments. Locals claim to still hear echoing footsteps and whispers coming from the ruins, a chilling reminder of the asylum's dark past. But for the group of friends, the experience had forged an unbreakable bond. They had faced the unimaginable and emerged stronger, united by their shared ordeal. The silence had been defeated, but its memory would forever haunt their dreams. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on notifications. Write which story you liked the most in the comments.